flying prices to the moon. The beers them waiting for the crash coming real soon. But the OG consultant watching, he's seen it all before. Over 40 years in the game, he knows the real score. Bull versus bear, a real estate fight. Peter Zalewski tell you who's wrong and who is right. In the Miami Condo investing club with no guess. He cuts through the noise and all of the mess. The Peter Zalewski Show. Big respect, OG in the game. Listen and learn the man's name. And up down. Peter Zalewski Show.
Happy Wednesday, Miami. This is the Peter Zalewski Show. I'm Peter Zalewski. I'm a condo consultant. I'm an expert witness. And I'm also the founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. If you're watching this podcast live, that means it's 4 o'clock on Wednesday, and I'm going to have a conversation with somebody I think you need to know, whether you live here, whether you just moved here, or whether you're thinking about coming down here. Everybody always gets down here on the street. They always need to know, I need to know a guy. I need to know a woman. I got just a person for you if you are in the condo game. If you live in a condo, whether you're thinking about buying a condo, maybe things have gone sideways in a condo, and you want to get it all figured out. That's the conversation I'm going to have today. I'm going to have a conversation with a case manager with a boutique law firm out of Coral Gables. The name of the firm is called Gomez Law. The name of the guest this week is Ketty Urbay. She's a case manager. She's the one who gets in there and digs in and investigates whenever a situation goes sideways. So if you're a condo owner and you feel like you got, they took advantage of you and you want to sue, what the first thing you do is you give Ketty a call, and Gomez Law can help you out. And then when you need an expert witness, you call me, Peter Zalewski. All that being said, let me go ahead and introduce Ketty. Ketty, welcome to the Peter Zalewski Show. Thanks for taking the time, carving it out for me. I know we're going to have a great, interesting, fun conversation.
We definitely will. Thank you so much, Peter. It's awesome to be here.
So Ketty, a little bit about your background. Let me kind of lay it out for the audience. So you have a real estate brokerage license. You also have a CAM. CAM is a community association manager. It's from the state of Florida. It gives you the ability to go in and run condo associations. But what are you doing now? You're actually working over at Gomez Law in Coral Gables. And what you guys do is you sue condo associations on behalf of individuals that feel as if, they got the raw end of the deal. So did I get that right? And can you fill in the blanks about living in Miami, where you're originally from, and sort of the overall experience you've had while you worked in the condo industry in South Florida?
Sure, happy to. So yes, you summarized that really well. I was born in Cuba, but raised here in Miami since I was 3 years old. So my entire life, pretty much. I kind of stumbled into the industry of property management and real estate. I actually went to school for something completely different, but as life happens, it happens. And pretty much since I was 18 years old, I've been in the industry. And eventually, after 10 years of doing landlord-tenant management for over 600 residential units, I decided to start my own boutique property management company that was specialized in commercial and residential condominiums, as well as home, continuously engrossed in this very interesting industry. But on top of that, several years ago, it's going to be about 4 years ago now, I found myself, unfortunately, in a very bad situation as a condo unit owner. And that's a story we can dive into down the conversation. That gave me a whole other perspective, or additional perspective, I should say. And yeah, in a really horrible experience, but in a way, a great experience, because that led me to teaming up with Eduardo Gomez, the attorney and owner of Gomez Law. And now for a year and a half now, I've been his case manager. And we are essentially helping the little guy, like I was a little girl, fighting with the big bad board, but the little girl won. Anyhow.
Ketty, talking big picture, you've been playing in the condo game and the real estate game in South Florida. So before the Great Recession, when we were first putting up our first big batch of condos where everybody was going crazy, 20% deposit down, you had flippers, you had a website called Condo Flip. You could get a contract, you could try to retrade a contract, you could make all your money. And then suddenly Hurricane Wilma came. I would argue, slowed everything down, stopped it in its tracks. We never came back. We started struggling. We were free falling. And then Lehman Brothers goes bad in September of 2008. The market just it free falls, it implodes, and selective investors who sort of saw it coming, they went in and they took advantage of it, and then we came back out of it. The overall rules of engagement changed, where suddenly if you were going to build new construction, it took a 50% deposit rather than before the Great Recession, which was only 20% deposit. So they tried to make it a little bit more legitimate in terms of who was buying and would they walk away when it came time to closing. So that's kind of what you've seen. You've been there, you've done that, and you're not one of the newbies that just parachuted in once the pandemic hit and they think they know everything about the marketplace because the way they did it back home, whether it be New York, it'd be Silicon Valley, it'd be London, it'd be Buenos Aires. Could you kind of talk big picture about everything you've seen over the course of, let's say, the last 20-something years and how the market has fluctuated from a condo perspective in South Florida?
Sure, absolutely. So interestingly enough, when I was a property manager for the landlord-tenant situation with an owner that had several properties, when I was getting ready to exit out of that position, he actually sold one of the communities that I managed to one of these condo developers during that time that it was like, every rental community out in Kendall, for those that are familiar with the area, was super popular for that. And I saw that whole process. I also knew the conditions, and the things that needed to be done for someone to even think about, buying into that whole situation as a condo unit owner, because now you just bought into all the problems, right, of all the buildings involved. I was in my 20s back then, and I was already starting to see and feel like, my gosh, there's a lot of things going on here that are just not right, or just not, not ideal, So as a realtor, I was representing a lot of buyers. And then when I would go to the management companies, to go through that whole process and the information that you needed, I saw how difficult that was. And that was when I first came across associations, because back then, my parents, we lived in a house. I'd never even understood what this was. And so again, I felt like helping other people. I was like, this is wrong. There's just a lot of things that aren't being done correctly. And then that's when I got the idea of branching off on my own and starting a management company for association. And lo and behold, when I started my own company, this is when all the associations were dealing with that whole foreclosure situation. And I was taking on associations that had like 50% delinquency.
Whoa.
I mean, it was nuts. And, as a newbie on the block, not newbie to management, but, a lot of board members were like, why should we hire you? They're like, how old are you? Like, how long have you been doing this? But mind you, I kind of had an expertise with collections in general, because with 600 tenants, I had to really be on top of that. So I had that in my pocket. And I mean, really, it was a horrible time. It was just so difficult, but I always ended up turning my communities around. I got them out of that situation, and they were kind of like, do we pay the insurance or do we pay the water? I mean, it was very stressful. And it took a lot of hard work to just focus on that, to get them out of the red and to a point where they could start contributing towards reserves. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because during this time, everybody's like, vote down reserves, which is how we got to where we got, right? Constantly thinking that way. And I've always come from a place of, I'm a continuous learner, and I like to educate my clients. I like to empower them. And I remember speaking to them and saying, something about having no reserves does not sound right. And deferred maintenance is a thing. And, being penny wise and pound foolish is a thing. And we really need to get you to a place where you are financially healthy as a community. So I used to, back then, even if the owners voted down the full reserves, I would have the board plug in a partial reserve, because I told them, once you start to get there, you're going to see, oh, it's growing and we can do certain things. And eventually the payment for full reserves, it's going to be totally doable, and owners are going to be used to it. because that whole like throw out the baby with the bathwater, I could tell wasn't working with the mentality that many board members and condo owners had, back then, and probably still, they still don't get it. So that was kind of like my intro, how everything kind of led into my interest, if you will, in helping especially mid-sized communities that usually got lost in the shuffle, right? They're really small for the big fish management companies. And then also when they got a very, very solo manager that really didn't know what they were doing, it was just as bad. But it got very taxing. And I'll let you ask me the next question, and I'll then share about that.
Okay. It's interesting, and I don't know where the audience is. So anybody out there in the internet world or the World Wide Web, what Ketty's referring to is in the state of Florida, and I'm not an attorney, check with your attorney, check with Gomez Law if you want, but generally speaking, what happens is the difference between a condo and an apartment is something called a declaration of condominium. It's about 300 pages long. When a condo wants to be created, they fill out an application. They spend probably about $200,000 now. They ship up that thing, FedEx up to Tallahassee or Orlando, whoever's overseeing it, Department of Business Professional Regulation, Division of Condominium, timeshares and mobile homes. It's an order like that. They sign off on it, that state. Once the state signs off on it, they notify the property appraiser. Property appraiser then allocates a folio number or a tax ID number to each individual unit. So for instance, if you have a 300-unit building and there's one owner, it's a corporation, it's a REIT, real estate investment trust, when they send that tax bill, they're sending one tax bill. Once you go through the condominium process of paying the $200,000, and I think that's what the law firm should bang them for, somewhere in and around there. Once you go through that process, that one 300-unit building, it turns into 301 tax identification numbers or folios. Why? There's one for the common areas, and then there's one per unit. Now you've just created a condominium. It's the same damn thing. There's no difference in the building. The only thing is this declaration of condominium, which, by the way, you are able to look up if you look at county records. Whatever county you live in, look up the records. They'll be made available to you. If you go to your condo association, they're going to try to bang you $100 for it. It's all you have to do is look on the government website, the clerk of the court. So where I'm going with this is when Ketty was talking about all these developments that were selling out these rentals, these were existing structures, and because of demand, the appetite was so strong for condominium, developers couldn't put them up quick enough. It takes 5 to 7 years to put up a condo. What they started doing is buying out these rentals. They started hiring a lawyer, send up that template declaration of condominium, do a search and replace and change the name. Next thing you know, 6 months later, they get approved, and now they have a condominium they can turn around and sell. Typically, these condo converters is what they call them. They would paint it. They lay down some carpeting. They might do minimal things, but they were not digging deep and making sure that the project was up to snuff. So when the market was booming, it was excellent. As soon as the market went to hell with the Great Recession, good luck selling that stuff. Good luck selling it. And you say, well, condo conversions, I don't know one. Well, if you know Brickell, there's one right at Coral Way in Miami Avenue. It's called the VU or the View. During the run-up in the market, those units were going for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a door. During the downturn, we were picking them up for $60,000 a door, $100,000 a door. And what were they when you bought them? Were they worth the $100,000? They were worth the $700,000. They were worth the $100,000 because they were apartments. They were pretty piss poor. There was not a lot there, but that's the way the game was played. So when Ketty's referring to that, if you are new to South Florida, you probably are not aware of that. You probably didn't even know that existed. And that's what a condo conversion is. Ketty, did I get anything wrong about that?
No, you didn't. And actually, I also wanted to mention something is that I continued to work as a realtor with selective clients and stuff once I started my management company. But even before that, as a realtor, there's a process where if the property being purchased is in a condo association or homeowner association, there's a rider, there's a bunch of documents that the buyer needs to receive from the seller and other disclosures, etc. And one of the things that I noticed, even speaking with my fellow realtors back then and still now a little bit less, but still, either the realtors didn't understand themselves, right? These animals known as condos. And it's not that it's their responsibility to have the buyer read them or whatever, but I would see it on my side as a manager owning the management company, when folks would come with their applications to be approved, it was wild to me that they didn't even understand what they were buying into. In other words, they didn't really look at the budget. They didn't really look at the last financials. They didn't read the frequently asked question sheet, a bunch of stuff. I, as a realtor, had several clients that were investors that would just buy a lot of single unit. And the reason they worked with me is because I had all the background with association, and we wouldn't just look at, oh, it's a great building, I love the unit. We would really analyze the information from the association. Now, one of the things that I love, and it still has its issues, but it's still a great step, is here in Miami-Dade County, they have the association registry, which is that new registry now that all the condos have to, upload the documents, renew certain ones every year. So at least it's another place, right, where potential buyers and even owners themselves can go and see these documents. It's not perfect, but I wish people would really take the time, especially if they're going to buy in an HOA or in a condo, especially, that they take the time to read these reports and these documents.
But they don't. I'll tell you who else doesn't? Banks. Banks don't read this stuff either. Right. I know this because during the downturn, we were working on the buy side. We were taking out portfolios of condos and buildings that had failed, either buying them from the banks or buying them from so-called investors who weren't getting a return. And the banks came up to me and they said, hey, is there a way to analyze these condos? Because we got a client that the loan is going to be greater than Fannie Mae, so we're not going to be able to sell it. We're going to need the portfolio or hold the loan. And we don't trust our client going somewhere else because someone else is going to poach him. They're going to put them into a mortgage and know we're going to lose the business, and that person's going to pull their cash out. So they said, can you evaluate condos for us? And I took a look at it. I got some legal opinions and basically was told I would be interfering with commerce. Because if I came out and said this was a buy, this was a hold, this was a sell, and all those buildings I said were a sell for whatever reasons, I would probably get sued for interfering with commerce. So when you mention the community registry, this is something Miami-Dade County put in place where they're making all the information available. So if you want to dig deep, you can find it. Condo associations hate it. They absolutely hate it. Why? Because it's sharing their secrets. And now guys like me, we can evaluate and we can analyze and we can assign a value to them. But as the market starts to open up after Surfside, this is what we're doing. We are going to analyze condo associations and tell you, are they feasible? Are they a buy? Are they a sell? Are they a hold? And that's really where I think it's going. But Ketty, I want to take you back to those days that you were referring to. You're talking about, we look at some of these buildings. They were old. They were this or that. People were just going in. They thought it was a great deal because they loved the view. They didn't run the fundamentals. I mentioned the VU or the View, depending on how you want to say it, on Coral Way in South Miami Avenue over the Brickell Avenue area. I remember, Ketty, and tell me if you saw this. I would go into that building because the units, again, sold for $500, $600, $700 a door, and we were picking them up for $60 to $100. People weren't paying their maintenance, so everybody who was paying, they had to sort of cover everything. And what this building was doing is they were unscrewing every other light bulb per floor. They turned off the cameras, the security system. They got rid of the valet. I'll never forget when we were walking through it. This is right there in the Brickell Avenue area. There was a bird's nest over one of the security cameras on the valet section on the west side of the building. And you would go in these buildings, and it was unbelievable. One example, a building right across the street called the Club at Brickell Bay. It's just a block down. You would go in there, and I'll never forget. I walked in one time, opened a door, and there was an REO agent. REO means real estate owned. That's when a bank takes title to a property because somebody didn't pay. They then give it to a realtor to sell. This realtor was making no cash, so they had a blow-up mattress laying on the floor, and they had all their clothes hanging because they were trying to do a deal. That's what it was like. And ultimately, Brickell Avenue, a lot of the condos, they put in place rules where you had to take a picture of anybody coming in. They didn't know who was going there. We had porn companies calling us saying, hey, listen, we want to do a shoot. We need a different background. We'll give you $2,000 for the day. And you had nothing to worry. We never leased them out, but you never had nothing to worry about because it was basically bedlam. Nobody knew who owned what. People were losing. They weren't paying. All kinds of crazy stories. Ketty, share some of your stories from back in the day with the audience, if you will, because many got here since the pandemic, and they think that the trees grow to the moon.
Yeah, no. That's not how it works. I honestly, these communities that I took over when I started my management business, like I mentioned, that were like deeply in the red, had all kinds of issues. A lot of them were in North Miami, the North Miami area, Coral Gables. Also had several down by South Miami. I did have several instances where I had folks that were, you know, selling drugs and doing all kinds of stuff in these units that had been abandoned, and the previous management company hadn't taken any sort of action. So it felt like, to these folks, like a free for all. I had situations. I did have a lot of communities in Miami Beach. Those older deco buildings are a perfect example of those previous rental communities converted to condos. These buildings that were built like in 1950 down in Euclid, those are a nightmare. They're a nightmare. And those I would have a lot of issues with sex workers and people, just sticking like 10 people in the unit and getting electricity from the common elements and stuff. So it was very much the wild, wild